My name again is Charlene Margot. I am co-founder of the Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Ross Greene, who will be talking with you about raising human beings, creating a collaborative partnership with your child. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for our friend Ross Greene. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to do this again. I'm going to put my slides up, if they will. There they are. I'm very glad to be with you all tonight and very glad that you are taking time out of your day to hang out with me for an hour. Important topic.
All right.
How do we raise our kids? Something I think it's good to have the luxury to think about. Something we're so busy we often don't think about, but worth thinking about, so that your parenting is actually somewhat planful, so that you're actually in touch with your values, so that you have goals as a parent. Find that in the abstract, those are things, I don't know, at least in my case, and my kids are now 25 and 22 years old, thought about that a lot before they were born, found myself so busy once they were born that it was hard to find a time to actually give that some thought. Tonight, we're going to give that some thought. How do we want to raise our kids so that they are good human beings? And what does that mean? So 40 to 45 minutes of me, then perhaps 10 to 15 minutes of you with your questions. And I'm very eager to hear the questions that you have. I'm seeing that people are having a hard time hearing me. Let's see if there's anything I can do about that. Let's see if it gets better. So who am I and what am I doing here? I'm actually not referring to myself there. I'm referring to you as a parent. Who are you as a parent? What's your goals? What's your values? There are some dilemmas of parenting that come up frequently, and some of them are on your screen. They feel like they are either or, but they're not. You want your kid to be independent, but not if they're going to make bad choices. You don't want to be harsh and rigid, but not if the result is a kid who's disrespectful and non-compliant. You don't want to be too pushy and overbearing, but not if your kid turns out to be unmotivated and apathetic. You want to have a good relationship with your kid, but not if that means being a pushover. You don't want to scream, but you do want to be heard. Those are not either or. They often feel like either or. We often act as if they are either or. But basically, a lot of people feel like they are ending up choosing between being permissive, giving the kid their freedom, letting their kid be who they are, and authoritarianism, meaning you're the primary player here. It doesn't have to be either or. Here's the good news. You're not shooting for control. So it's not a choice between being permissive and being overly authoritarian. You're not shooting for control. The more control you shoot for, the less control you have. And loss of control makes human beings feel uncomfortable in lots of circumstances, but perhaps most especially in our parenting. Why did I used to be flight anxious? Because I wasn't flying the plane, and I don't know how to fly planes, but I still wasn't under control. I wasn't in control. Why do I prefer to drive rather than having one of my children drive me? Well, number one, my son drives too fast, which is like me. My daughter drives too slow, which is unlike me. My significant other is too cautious. I want to be in control. Lots of areas of life that we like to have control, but perhaps especially in parenting, we want things to go smoothly. We want things to turn out well for our kid. And sometimes that causes us to shoot for too much control. But control is a delusion. You didn't have control the minute the kid popped into this world. So control is not what you're shooting for. What are you shooting for? Influence. Influence. That's the best you can shoot for. The best you can do is have influence in the life of your kid. Now, the good news, you have influence already. Just by virtue of the fact that you are a parent, you have influence. The bad news, there are things you could do that screw up that influence, including shooting for too much control. Shooting for too much control can reduce the amount of influence you have. And you don't have as much influence as you may have thought. But once again, if you use your influence the wrong way, you'll have even less. So power and control is one path to having influence, but there's another path. And that's why this is not an either or on those different dilemmas I showed you on the previous slide. And the different path, which is not power and control, involves collaboration. Collaboration, not control. I find that control does not enhance communication between you and your kid. Collaboration does. I find that shooting for control does not improve your relationship with your kid. Collaboration does. And best of all, I find that control doesn't prepare kids for the real world as well as people think it does. I think collaboration prepares kids for what's going to come at them in the real world much better than power and control do. Interesting, eh? What is the daunting task that confronts your kid? Confronts all kids. They got to figure out who they are. They got to figure out their skills, their beliefs, their values, their preferences, their personality traits, their goals, their direction. Some kids figured out that stuff faster than others. They also have to get comfortable with who they are. And then they have to pursue a life that is congruent with who they discover they are. Lots of issues adults face in their lives are a byproduct of never figuring that stuff out, never getting comfortable with it, and never living a life that is congruent with it. That probably tells you that somebody else was calling those shots, and those shots are your kids to call. That's the daunting task for your kid. There are things us caregivers could do to make that task less daunting, still daunting, but less so. There are things we could do to jam the kid up so that that task is more daunting, but that's the task. Notice it does not say the task for your kid is to figure out who you want them to be and try hard to be that. Doesn't say that. What, therefore, is the daunting task for you? You get to figure out who your child is, get comfortable with it, and then help them lead a life that is congruent with it. That's a little different than the job description many parents have laid out for themselves. Many parents thought it was their job to take the lump of clay that was born to them their child, and mold it into the form that they envisioned. Your child was not a lump of clay the minute they popped out. They were somebody. You know this. They were somebody the minute they popped out. And you don't have the power. You can try. I don't think it's going to go well. You can try to mold the lump of clay, but if the lump of clay is not a lump of clay, you're going to get major pushback, especially if you're trying to mold the lump of clay into something it isn't. So your primary role in the life of your kid is to be responsive to the hand you've been dealt. I can think of so many scenarios in the kids that I've worked with and the parents over the last 35 years where the major source of conflict between child and parent was parents were parenting in a way that wasn't congruent with who their kid is. Parents were trying hard to turn their kid into something their kid isn't. Being responsive to the hand you've been dealt. I could put that another way. Meeting your kid where they're at. Giving each kid what they need. Now, all of that often causes parents to feel, so you have just greatly diminished my role as a parent. I understand that, but that's actually not what just happened. Don't forget, you have influence. Just because your child isn't a lump of clay to be molded into the form that you desire doesn't mean that you don't have influence. It just means you don't have control. That's a very important distinction. Your child actually isn't growing and learning and developing in a vacuum. How do you exert your influence? This is big. Through your expectations. The expectations you place on your child are the way in which you exert your influence on the life of your child. And where do those expectations come from? Hopefully, your experience, wisdom, and values. Your expectations should be a reflection of your experience, wisdom, and values. Not the next door neighbor's experience, wisdom, and values. They get their own experience, wisdom, and values. Not your parents' experience, wisdom, and values. I mean, they may be fairly similar. If you liked them, if you didn't like them, then those aren't going to be your experience, wisdom, and values. But let me give you an example here. If you value having your child get a good job someday and be independent of you financially, then you will probably also possibly value good grades, completed homework. Those are your values. They spring from your experience and your wisdom, but they are impacting your expectations. The reason you expect your child to get good grades is not because of how it looks to somebody else, but because of your experience, wisdom, and values. You feel that if they don't, it's going to be much harder for them to get into a good college, perhaps. It's going to be harder for them to live financially independently from you. If experience tells you that if you leave food laying about in your home, then you're going to value a clean home, and you're going to value your child keeping their room clean. That's going to translate into an expectation that the child not leave food in their room, not leave dirty dishes in their room. But just an example, I actually have never seen the point of a made bed. A made bed. I don't see the point. I actually like kind of getting into an unmade bed. So that's my values. That's my experience. My wisdom is it doesn't really matter. And quite frankly, another big part of parenting is deciding what matters and what doesn't, because everything can't matter. Some things have to not matter. Otherwise, too many things matter. So I didn't put that expectation on my kids. I didn't care if their beds were made. How did that turn out? My daughter's bed was always made. My son's bed was never made. And I think that's probably still the case. That's me letting them have their own values on things I don't really care very much about. Life is rather pleasant when your expectations, which spring from your experience, wisdom, and values, when your expectations are being met. Life is pleasant. You have expectations, your child is meeting them. When does life get interesting? When they're not. Life gets interesting when there are expectations your child is having difficulty meeting, because that is now bumping up against your experience, wisdom, and values. And how you handle that is where the magic lies. But all I've done so far is set the stage. Your child not meeting your expectations could trigger screaming, conflict, sermonizing, all kinds of things that unmet expectations, or what I tend to call unsolved problems, those are the ones that cause conflict, tension, stress between kids and caregivers. Expectations being met, that doesn't cause any stress because we're all good. Is there any kid ever invented that was meeting every single expectation their parents placed upon them? I never met that kid. That wasn't my two kids. They met most, but they didn't meet some. I never met that kid. Now, maybe that kid exists, but I've spent most of my career working with kids who have lots of concerning behaviors. The reason there's lots of concerning behaviors is because there are lots of expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting. And those concerning behaviors are simply the ways in which the kid is communicating that they're having difficulty meeting those expectations. That's what concerning behavior is. But we're not only focused tonight on kids with concerning behaviors. We're focused on all kids tonight. And now you have a good sense about when disagreements or conflict could occur between you and your child, when they're having difficulty meeting your expectations, which are an expression of your experience, wisdom, and values. Parents who love life to go perfectly smoothly for the children tend to be allergic to struggles. Struggles are a good thing. Struggles are where a lot of growth occurs. So you don't want to be allergic to your child struggling. Your child struggling to meet expectations could be a sign that they need your help. They're especially going to need your help if they're having difficulty surmounting the struggle on their own. Here are some of the potential outcomes, and this comes of struggling. And this comes from the work of a very prominent mental health professional who most of you have probably not heard of, James Marcia, who talked about how our identities as people are formed. And he created kind of a chi-square. Have you struggled? Have you not? Have you achieved an identity because of that struggle? Have you not? If you haven't struggled, but you've already decided who you are as a person, that's what he called identity foreclosed. A close friend of mine knew that she was going to be an attorney by the time she was 5 or 6 years old. She didn't decide that, not at the age of 5 or 6. Her parents decided that for her. She was a miserable attorney. Her identity was established way before she had a chance to struggle with it. Another possibility, the person has struggled, but that struggle has not yet led them to who they are, their values, goals, direction. That's called identity moratorium. That's an identity that's been put on hold. They've struggled. They haven't come to any conclusions about themselves yet. Identity diffused is where the person has neither struggled nor achieved an identity. The basic notion here, by the way, is that struggling is when we do the thinking we need to do, to think about, who am I? What are my values? What are my beliefs? What direction am I taking here based on those values? And then the best outcome, at least as far as James Marshall is concerned, was what he called identity achieved, which is where you have struggled, you have done the important thinking you need to do, and you have come to conclusions about who you are, your values, the wisdom that you have, the direction that you're heading in, your skills. James Marshall would say, you can't figure out who you are without the struggle. I would actually be inclined to agree with that. By the way, in the case of identity moratorium folks, and identity diffused folks, sometimes it's way later in life that they finally figure out who they are, and sometimes decide, I don't think I've been heading in the right direction for most of my life. That can happen too. Better late than never. All right, now, if your child is not meeting a certain expectation, how you respond is going to be crucial. The fact that they're not meeting a particular expectation is a given of development. There are going to be expectations your child has difficulty meeting. That is not incredible cause for alarm unless the problem doesn't get solved. That is not a cause for panic. That is not a cause for you to take the reins. How you respond is going to be absolutely crucial, and it's going to have a tremendous impact on your relationship with your child, and it's going to determine whether your influence is truly influential. As you've already heard me say, those expectations that your child is having difficulty meeting, in my line of work, we call those problems that need to be solved, or unsolved problems. Any expectation that your child is having difficulty meeting reliably is an unsolved problem. Now, it turns out we adults often invoke, this is the biggest mistake we could make. When a child is having difficulty meeting a particular expectation, we often come to the rapid conclusion that they're having difficulty meeting it because they don't wanna, I guess could be true, but more importantly, that they're not motivated to meet it. And then what do? We do what a lot of mental health professionals still tell parents to do. We deploy motivational strategies to give them the incentive to meet the expectation that they're struggling to meet. That could include stickers, that could include gold stars, that could include points, that could include tokens, some form of reward, that could also include some form of punishment. All of this stemming from expectations that a child is having difficulty meeting. Expectations we feel very strongly about because of our experience, wisdom, and values, but a lot of those interventions don't come close to actually solving the problem. I think of those as interventions that spring from power and control. But they don't help us understand what's getting in your way. So Here's piece of advice number one for the evening. Don't assume that it's lagging motivation that's getting in the way for your kid on meeting a particular expectation. And don't instantly assume that rewards or punishments are going to help you solve that problem. We are so quick to leap to consequences as the means of solving problems. It steers us in the wrong direction almost every time we do it. Nope. We're not going to be able to solve this problem on our own. Us caregivers, solving the problem is not your job solely. This is a team effort. You and your kid. And there's some very important information you need from your kid to get this problem solved. You need to find out what's getting in your kid's way. And so here's piece of advice number two for the evening. Ask your kid. I cannot tell you how often I'm working with caregivers, whether this is parents or educators or staff in treatment facilities, who feel it is their job to know what's getting in the kid's way on an expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting. Whether that's difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night, or difficulty turning off the Xbox to come in for dinner, or difficulty turning off the electronics by 9 p.m. to go to sleep, or difficulty waking up at 7 a.m. to get ready for school in the morning, or difficulty eating what mom or dad has made for dinner, or difficulty taking the trash out on Tuesday mornings, or difficulty going to school, or difficulty going to school on time. I could go on forever. Or difficulty completing XYZ homework assignment. These are all expectations that kids routinely have difficulty meeting. They are an opportunity for you to head straight for power and control, but they are also an opportunity for you to head for collaboration. When you're shooting for power and control, you're on your own. When you're shooting for collaboration, you got a partner. Your kid. Power causes conflict. Collaboration brings people together. Let's keep going. The problems that affect your kid's life, the expectations they're having difficulty meeting, don't actually have to cause conflict. They're only going to cause conflict if you're shooting for power and control as the way to solve them. But we have to remember, these are just problems that need to be solved. Problems don't have to cause conflict. That's important message number 3. Struggling is good. Perpetual struggling is not good. Struggling simply tells us that there's a problem that needs to be solved. Here are some of the prototypical adult responses to problems, and none of these would I recommend. Oh, some of them are not so terrible. You could simply point out to the kid that they're not meeting a particular expectation. Probably no harm done. But if they perpetually are not meeting the expectation, that's not going to get you far enough. Apparently, they're not able to solve it on their own. So, not tragic to give the kid a chance to solve it on their own, not tragic to point out to them that there's an expectation they're having difficulty meeting, only tragic if the problem doesn't get solved over a long period of time. Adults often like to explain why it's important that the kid meet the expectation. That's actually part of the problem-solving process I'll be describing in just a few minutes. But by itself, it's not sufficient. This is the most popular adult response to problems. Push the kid harder. Insist harder that the kid meet the expectation. I don't recommend that at all. If something's getting in the way of the kid meeting the expectation, and it's not poor motivation, then neither pushing harder nor insisting harder is going to get the job done, because those are not strategies that would be useful for solving problems. You could insist even more, known as badgering. You could solve the problem for the child. Oof. Maybe it'll get it solved, but you're not promoting any independence there if you're solving the problem for your child and you want to promote independence. You could offer the kid a reward for meeting the expectation. You could. Experience tells me that the reward isn't going to last forever. And if you keep having to come up with new rewards for the kid to meet the same expectation, number one, eventually you're going to run out of rewards. And number two, that's making it clear that we actually still don't know what's making it hard for the kid to meet the expectation. That's all that tells me. You could punish the kid for not meeting the expectation. Don't forget, reward and punishment are cut from the exact same bolt of cloth. Many people think that rewarding does no harm. It's only punishment that does harm. Many people don't even think punishment does no harm. Many people think punishment does no harm. Whatever. Neither rewarding nor punishing is a problem-solving strategy. And if there's an expectation your child is having difficulty meeting, you have a problem to solve, not a kid to motivate. This is a huge paradigm shift for many parents. We'll make that important point of the evening, number 5, or whatever number we're on. If your kid is having difficulty meeting an expectation, that's a problem that needs to be solved, not a kid that needs to be motivated. That's big. So now, pretty much the last thing I'm going to talk about, how you solve the problem is going to be crucial. And you have 3 options for handling unsolved problems. Notice, remember, an unsolved problem is an expectation your kid is having difficulty meeting. If there's an expectation your kid is meeting reliably, you don't need these 3 plans. It's not an unsolved problem. If your kid is brushing their teeth before going to bed at night reliably, you don't need one of these 3 plans. It's not an unsolved problem. It's a met expectation. No plan needed. If your kid is doing their homework as well and as often as you'd like them to, you don't need a plan. It's not an unsolved problem. It's a met expectation. No plan needed. But if there's any expectation your kid is having difficulty meeting reliably, meaning even if they can meet it sometimes and not others, by the way, the most common adult explanation for why a child is meeting an expectation sometimes and not others is as follows. They can do it when they want to. You're now in the motivational territories. And the truth is, they can do it when they want to simply tells me that we still don't know why the kid is able to meet the expectation under some conditions and not others. So what I've done here is I've created a shorthand for thinking about how we want to approach unsolved problems. And that shorthand is Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. Wow. This encompasses a great deal of what we've been talking about already. Plan A is when you're solving the problem unilaterally. It's where you're deciding what the solution is and imposing it on your kid. That's power. That's control. I don't recommend it. Remember, power causes conflict. Now, you might be thinking, conflict isn't so bad. Conflict is a necessary part of parenting. I disagree. I don't think conflict is a necessary part of parenting. I think that there are going to be times when your kid is having difficulty meeting expectations, and I don't think conflict is a very good way to solve problems. I don't think conflict is a given. Plan B, I'd recommend that one, is where you're solving a particular problem collaboratively, and I'll describe the 3 steps for doing that on the next slide. And Plan C is where you're putting a particular expectation on hold, at least for now. Why might you do that? Well, In the case of the kids I work with who have a lot of concerning behaviors and therefore tend to have a lot of unsolved problems, it's because we need to prioritize because we can't solve everything at once. So that's why we're putting some unsolved problems on hold for now. We can't solve everything at once. And if we try to solve everything at once, we're not going to solve anything at all. It's another reason we might use Plan C as our approach to an unsolved problem. We don't think there is a snowball's chance of the kid meeting the expectation right now. We don't think they can do it. We think it's an expectation that shouldn't be even being put on the kid. Right now, we don't think they can meet that expectation. And quite frankly, there is no point in putting an expectation on a kid that we already know they can't reliably meet. One more reason you might want to use Plan C. You want to see if your child can solve the problem on their own. You want to promote independence. You're watching closely. You've seen that there's an expectation your kid is having difficulty meeting. Maybe you've pointed it out to them. Maybe not. Can they do it? Not awful if they can't. Great if they can. Not awful if they can't. If they can't do it on their own, that tells you they need some help from you. That's another circumstance in which you would do Plan B. So as you can tell, Plan C helps us caregivers sort through a few very important things, including, number one, if your child has a lot of unsolved problems, how much do you actually care about all those expectations? It's a good thing to ask ourselves. You know, you got a kid who's got 30 unsolved problems. One question you should be asking yourself is, how much do I care about all of these? Another question you should be asking yourself is, which ones am I going to try to solve first? Because I can't solve them all at once. Another question you should be asking yourself is, can this kid actually meet these expectations? Because there's no point in putting an expectation on a kid you already know they can't reliably meet. And then final consideration, yes, I think it's important. Yes, I think they can do it, but I want to see if they can solve it on their own. All of that is Plan C. So I only have one thing more to talk about tonight, and that is, how do you solve a problem collaboratively? Now, before I talk about these 3 steps, I want to make it clear that you're not doing these 3 steps in the heat of the moment. That's bad timing on solving problems. No reason to do this in the heat of the moment. Expectations kids are having difficulty meeting tend to be highly predictable. You could, when I'm done talking tonight, you could make a list of every expectation the kid you're thinking about right now is having difficulty meeting. And then, because you've identified them ahead of time, you could solve them proactively rather than reactively. One of the most common things I say to parents and educators and staff in treatment facilities is, I'm going to get you out of the heat of the moment. Once you identify a kid's unsolved problems, there are very few surprises left. The trick is to identify them proactively. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself stuck in the heat of the moment every time. I'm going to get you out of the heat of the moment. You got to make your list. Once you have your list, you got to decide which unsolved problems you want to start working on first. Now, which might those be? Well, my flip answer to that question is, it doesn't matter that much. More important to start solving problems collaboratively with your child than to be splitting hairs on which unsolved problems to start with. Much more important to start than it is where you start. But if you want an algorithm, and this, quite frankly, is more an algorithm for kids who have lots of unsolved problems, safety first. Any unsolved problem causing safety issues is a high priority, safety first. If you don't have safety issues, you're either going with frequency, the unsolved problems setting in motion concerning behaviors most often, or gravity, the unsolved problems having the greatest negative impact on your kid's life or the lives of others. How many do you get to pick? 3. You're never working on more than 3 unsolved problems at any given point in time. And you're not working on all 3 at the same time. You're working on them separately, but never more than 3. The rest, you are putting on hold, at least for now. Plan C. The ones you're working on right now, Plan B, which is 3 steps: the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. The names of the steps don't matter that much, I always say. The ingredients matter a lot. What's the main ingredient of the empathy step? Information gathering. Gathering information from who? About what? Gathering information from your kid about what's making it hard for them to meet a particular expectation. I'm always telling caregivers to be prepared for jaw-dropping moments in the empathy step. When you discover that what you thought was making it hard for your kid to meet an expectation is not what's making it hard for your kid to meet a particular expectation. What's the main ingredient of the empathy step for you? Listening, asking really good questions. Both very empathic things to do. I think of listening as the purest form of empathy. I think we should do it much more often. The define adult concern step. I think one of the biggest issues in our world today is that we're not listening to each other very well. I'm not sure we ever have, but it seems worse now than ever. Empathy. The define adult concern step is where the adult is entering their concern and consideration on the same unsolved problem. The same concern that might previously had led you into plan A is now leading you into plan B. Same concern, completely different approach to getting it addressed. What are us adults concerned about? How the unsolved problems affecting the kid and or how the unsolved problems affecting other people. And within those 2 categories, what are we usually concerned about? Health, safety, learning. Can you believe it? The universe of things us caregivers are concerned about when it comes to our kids come down to how the unsolved problems affecting the kid and or how the unsolved problems affecting other people. And those come down to health, safety, learning. That's the easiest and the fastest of the 3 steps. Finally, the invitation. This is where kid and caregiver are putting their heads together, collaborating on a solution, but a solution that must meet 2 criteria. This is big, got to be realistic. Both parties got to be able to do what they're agreeing to do. Got to be mutually satisfactory. The solution has to address the concerns of both parties. Here's what I've been saying a lot lately. And not only my work with kids, but world history bears me out on it. If a solution is not realistic and mutually satisfactory, I promise you, this problem is still unsolved. All right. Normally, I would tell you a quick story here to elucidate the 3 steps of Plan B, but I'm running a little late and I'm seeing that we have many questions and I want to make sure that we get as many questions answered as possible. So let's turn our attention to the questions and instead of me taking up time with a quick story, and hopefully the questions will help us go even further into what you've been hearing about so far.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greene. We can tell from all your comments and emojis and reactions, everybody, that this is really hitting home. And we do these events all the time, Ross, and yours about makes me cry. Parents, you need to listen to him. You really need to listen to him. I have 2 kids who are both young adults. My oldest son just had a baby not too long ago, and he said to me, she seems to have an awful lot of opinions for somebody who's 3 weeks old.
Good
right?
for her.
Right? And that's what they're letting her be. So there. Okay, so great questions. Thank you, everybody. Really great questions, vulnerable and honest. Let's go, Dr. Greene. First one, What if your kid doesn't agree that something is a problem in the first place?
Very good question. That's the very beginning of your kid letting you know your concern or perspective on that unsolved problem. What they're basically saying is, I don't agree with your expectation. Good. That's a very good start, believe it or not, to the empathy step. It's not the end of the empathy step, it's the beginning of the empathy step. Let me give you an example. I've noticed you've been having, there's a video of Plan B on the Lives in the Balance website of this very unsolved problem. I've noticed that you've been having this was a COVID unsolved problem. So if you want to see this video, go to the guided tour on the Lives in the Balance website and go to the section with the videos in it. At the very bottom where we're showing video of Plan B being done, you'll see this video. It's a fantastic example of Plan B. But the unsolved problem was difficulty putting the iPhone away during virtual learning. An unsolved problem that did not exist pre-COVID anywhere nearly as much as it did during COVID. And the kid's concern was that she didn't think that she didn't understand how most of what she was being taught was going to be useful to her in the real world. And she had other concerns too, like she enjoyed communicating with her friends during virtual learning, and that virtual learning was kind of boring, so she was keeping herself entertained. But her number one concern was that she didn't understand how the information that she was learning in school was going to be important to her in real life. She had very high aspirations. She wanted to get good grades. She wanted to go to a good college. She just didn't see the point. She especially didn't see the point of doing 2 or 3 hours of homework a night on things she already knew. Now I'm sitting there thinking, good for you for saying that, kid. But that is the beginning of her concern or perspective. And unless we are able to incorporate those concerns, and so what that was translating into is if she was sometimes looking up answers online because she didn't think it was worth the time to learn things she already knew or things that she felt were going to be useless to her. Her mother's concern. This is a great video. You should try to find it and watch it. Her mother's concern was that if she didn't do even the things that were boring for her and didn't do the things that she didn't think were important, eventually that was going to come back and haunt her. And this was a girl who was in the 10th grade. And they had to work together on a solution that addressed the concerns of both parties. I don't want to spoil it for you. You got to watch the video. It's like telling you the end of the movie before you watch it. But that was the challenge for mom and daughter. But daughter's concern was essentially, I don't think you should be concerned about what you're concerned about because I don't agree with your expectation. Good. That's the beginning of the discussion.
Okay, so here's somebody who I think answered their own question. Parent says, I would like my son to move up in his competitive soccer level, but is that his problem or my expectation? Seems like the latter.
Well, it sounds like it's your expectation. And if he wants to move up, then you're in good shape. You agree with each other. It's if he doesn't want to move up that you have a problem that needs to be solved. I didn't hear you say your son wants to move up. I heard you say you want your son to move up. Great to have that as an expectation. It will be met if your son also wants to move up. But if your son doesn't, once again, now you need 3 steps. Plan A, the empathy step, the define it all concern step, and the invitation step.
Absolutely. Okay. So here's a question we're getting sort of in different kinds of ways, Ross, but clearly this is hitting people. How do you get more answers in the empathy step when you ask your child and they say, I don't know?
I don't know is about the most common response even I get in the empathy step. There are many things that have been built into the model to guard against I don't know, and to make it more likely that a kid will talk in the empathy step. Let me just go through a few of them. The first is how you actually word the unsolved problem. And there's another video in the guided tour section. These are obviously things we wouldn't have time to do in an hour, but you've got the website waiting for you, and it's right up on your screen right now. Just find the guided tour. There's a video. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Remind me the question. It's late for me.
I know, we were talking about, I don't know, as a
Oh, right.
common response.
First is how you word the unsolved problem, because there's ways to word the unsolved problem that will be conducive to the kid talking, and ways to word an unsolved problem that will shut the kid up. And I don't know can sometimes be code for, I'm not talking about this right now. So word your unsolved problems well. And that's where I was going on the website. You want to look at the video on the website in the guided tour for how to use the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. That's going to help you word your unsolved problems well. But let's say you worded your unsolved problem well and you still get I don't know, which is not uncommon. You then have 8 drilling strategies to choose from, to try probing strategies, to try to extract information from a kid. I don't know can mean a bunch of things. I don't know could mean, you're asking me? I'm a little surprised that you're asking me about what's getting in my way. I'm not used to that. I'm used to you telling me what's getting in my way. Not only that, I'm used to you telling me the solution to what you think is getting in my way. This is new for me. I don't know. I don't know could mean I haven't thought about this before because you haven't asked me very much. I don't know could mean I'm thinking about it. Can you give me a second? I don't mean no could mean many different things, but you're going to rely on drilling strategies to extract information and keep the kid talking. There are 8 of them. I'm just going to tell you about one of them. It's the one you're going to be using the most. Reflective listening. Mirroring. Simply saying back to the kid whatever the kid just said to you. I know it sounds kind of basic, but it's a very good way to help the kid feel heard, very good way to help the kid feel understood, very good way to help them clarify their concerns, very good way to help them feel like their concerns are legit, very good way to keep them talking. I could ask for no more from a drilling strategy, reflective listening. So if the kid says, I don't know, my first response would be, think about it. We're not in a rush. By the way, it could also be the kid thinking, if I tell you, you're going to lower the boom. Why would I tell you? You might want to say, and by the way, you're not in trouble. I'm not mad at you. I'm just trying to understand. By the way, you don't want to be doing this in the heat of the moment. You're going to get more I don't knows in the heat of the moment. You're going to get fewer I don't knows if you're doing this proactively. Bottom line here is, I don't know is par for the course. And if you dive into this model in a little bit further, you'll get lots of strategies for how to navigate I don't know.
All right. And then Ross, here's the $1 million corollary question for parents of teens. What do you do if your teenager responds, I don't care, and won't engage in conversation?
I don't care is in the same realm as I don't know. It is the beginning of the kid's concern or perspective. And by the way, they don't have to care about your expectation. It's your expectation. They don't have to care about it any more than you have to deeply care about their concern. The prerequisite in this model is not caring about each other's concerns. I think that is aiming too high. The crucial piece in this model is to identify the concerns of both parties and come up with solutions that take those concerns into account, that are mutually satisfactory. So if a kid says, I don't care in response to an unsolved problem, I would give the kid 10 points for honesty, start drilling. And by the way, I don't care could mean, I've had this unsolved problem for 10 years. It has gone unsolved for 10 years. It is a very old unsolved problem. I gave up caring about this expectation a very long time ago. So I wouldn't even take I don't care personally. I would not get my dander up about I don't care. I would find out what I don't care means. And then you probably have a kid who's talking.
All right. Last question, Ross. This is one that I think a lot of parents share. Parent asks, how do I motivate a kid to have a goal and give 100% in achieving the goal, especially when their priority is having fun and they don't really want to do the hard work?
Well, I don't think that motivation is what you're trying to do. I don't think that unmotivated is what the kid is. I think that just wanting to have fun is a bit of an American tradition. So I can't blame a kid for wanting to have fun. That doesn't mean that you can't talk to the kid about goals, what their game plan is, what their values are, what their direction is, what they feel their skills are. So there's a lot of things in that question that suggest that we think we already know what's going on with the kid, and I think we don't. So just because they want to have fun, just because they haven't chosen a direction yet, some kids choose directions a little later. And I'm not sure there's a timeline on choosing a direction. You choose a direction when you're ready to choose a direction. Some kids haven't even decided by the time they're done with college what their direction is going to be. They needed more time to figure it out. To tell you the truth, I'd rather a kid take their time choosing their direction, so long as this doesn't go on forever. I'd rather a kid take their time choosing a direction and therefore choose one that makes the most sense for them than choose one so prematurely that 20 years later, they're miserable because they chose something that wasn't a good fit for them.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ross Greene. This has been incredible. Thank you, everybody. Parents, wonderful questions. Thank you for all the support, all the emojis. Really, really an amazing presentation. Everybody's going to need to share it with a significant other, maybe their kids, and watch it again. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Ross Greene. We are so grateful for a brilliant presentation tonight.
Thanks for inviting me to do this.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. Good night.